Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Rochford Files with your host, Andrew Rochford. And if you like the type of content I'm putting out as I'm trying to get back to being regularly active, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get into this next clip, which comes from yesterday's episode of Bill Maher. And this will feature Bari Weiss, the liberal writer who used to be at the New York Times, talking about it being time for that it's time for her to be done with COVID. So I'm about to play the clip, then get into my thoughts about it right after that finishes.
I'm done.
With this question?
No, I'm done with COVID.
Oh,
I'm done. It's
yeah.
like I went so hard on COVID. I
remember.
sprayed the Pringles cans that I bought at the grocery store, stripped my clothes off because I thought COVID would be on my clothes. Like, I did it all. I watched Tiger King. I got to the end of Spotify. Like, we all did it, right?
And no, we didn't all do it.
Well, here's the thing. A lot of us did do it. And then we were told, you get the vaccine. You get the vaccine and you get back to normal. And we haven't gotten back to normal. And it's ridiculous at this point. I know that so many of my liberal and progressive friends are with me on this, and they do not want to say it out loud because they are scared to be called anti-vax or to be called science denial or to be, smeared as a Trumper. I'm sorry, if you believe the science, you will look at the data that we did not have 2 years ago, and you will find out that cloth masks do not do anything. You will realize that you can show your vaccine passport at a restaurant and still be asymptomatic and carrying Omicron. And you will realize, most importantly, that this is going to be remembered by the younger generation as a catastrophic moral crime. The city of Flint, Michigan, which is 80%, I think, minority students, has just announced indefinite virtual schooling. In the past 2 years, we've seen among young girls a 51% increase in self-harm. People are killing themselves. They are anxious. They are depressed. They are lonely. That is why we need to end it more than any inconvenience that it's been to the rest of us. I think it's a pandemic. It's like, at this point, it's a pandemic of bureaucracy. It's a pandemic of bureaucracy.
So let's break down the points that Bari Weiss was making here, because I do think she had a couple solid ones, but there's a lot that aren't that good, to be honest. First off, one of her better points was the fact that liberals and progressives are not very willing to challenge the narratives that have come about from COVID, and they have also stood silent when they've admitted that those original narratives have been busted. And a couple recent examples of that being Bill Maher and the Daily Show host on Comedy Central, Trevor Noah, when they both finally challenged those narratives a bit, the liberals really lost it on them. But your mainstream progressives, they have stood silent on that as well because they're afraid of being called anti-vax, science deniers, being grouped in with right wingers. And even though I watch a lot of people in this independent left media space who are more willing to challenge these COVID narratives, then blow up when some of these narratives fall apart. I also realize at the same time that that's only a very small segment of people getting to see that. The next main point that is actually good, even though I wouldn't word it the same way as she does, is when she says it's the pandemic of bureaucracy. The reason why I disagree with it is because this is a pandemic of the ruling class, as they're trying to slowly strip away at previous rights that we had before COVID started back in March of 2020. And what they hope is to not let us fully return back to that. But that's about all I'll mainly give, because what I do know about someone like Bari Weiss, she's a rich journalist who is in a place of privilege to opt out of the hardships, the harm of COVID. She doesn't have to worry about many of the same things that more other people do. I mean, even if we just go back to the way that things were before the pandemic kicked off, that pre status quo just flat out isn't good enough, especially for the proletariat. Because let's look at what problems the working class face. That is stagnant wages that haven't moved in years from a federal standpoint. Then, when you look at the lowest wage states in the United States, their minimum wage has not moved since what, 2008? Then, another example of the problem is Bari Weiss makes enough money to where she doesn't have to worry about healthcare. There's a lot of people who are working hard in this country, probably 2, 3 jobs, and playing Russian roulette with their health because they don't want to lose that money to excessively bloated deductions from their paycheck every 2 to 4 weeks. Because if we had Medicare for all, at least a third of these deaths would have been saved. And regardless of where you stand on the death count, a third of those deaths would have been a lot of lives saved. Then another struggle that working class people face is how everywhere you live in the country, the price of housing keeps rising. Doesn't matter whether you're trying to buy a house, you live in an apartment, even the lowest of lowest priced apartments are catching up to the more expensive ones. And I know this from experience because the first apartment I lived in was about 550 square feet, $500 rent, 2010. And now I'm sure that apartment is probably like $1,200, $1,300 a month. Inflation is a big problem, but it's also not one that politicians can directly control. But what they can control is making sure people are put in a position to uh, better get past the inflation. Instead, what we're being told is, oh, you have to keep wages lower to avoid inflation. Well, the capitalist class doesn't care about your stagnant wages. They're going to do it anyway. And a privileged person like Bari Weiss probably owns her home. And she probably has a fixed rate monthly payment that whenever inflation does happen, she doesn't have to worry about having to pay $50, $100 more a month. Then let's get into another issue that the working class struggles with. That is finding a job. And anyone who thinks it's just that damn easy to go out and find a new job shows their privilege and a disconnect, because you would know the struggle of finding a job, especially if you've lived through the 2007 recession. And that was a very humbling experience, especially if you're someone who has a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and you have to battle with people to get jobs in retail. So that's a reality that the political ruling class has not done anything to really help out with, given how there are still a lot of people who are probably looking for jobs, but the Biden administration is really out there telling us that it's a remarkable economic recovery. And we're not even back to the point of where the job market was before we started to shut down in March of 2020. Then you look at the issue of safety. The working class is does not feel safe and secure in these times of COVID. I mean, it's a very mixed answers on that front, and there's been a lot of confusion. I mean, yes, the most masks do not help as well as we were told that they were supposed to. I know a lot of people will still wear their mask, whichever type of mask they have, as much as they can, even in spite of knowing that. But we were told that people were supposed to get back to normal after a higher percentage of people were starting to get vaccinated. But when it came down to it, it just came as a way for the Biden administration to take authoritarian measures and potentially threaten the livelihood of the working class by threatening their job, which turns into their home, their ability to take care of their families. And when you have the sense of privilege that Bari Weiss does, you don't have to worry about that. And even though we aren't sure, we're getting a lot of confusion of the COVID narratives, it's still a real issue that the working class has to deal with on a daily basis. And we aren't getting the real help needed to survive this, because what we could be doing is pushing treatments a lot harder, but not with this vaccine or else type of messaging that we have got. But this is a reality that the wine, liberal, brunch loving suburbanite types like Bari Weiss, they can just decide, I'm no longer interested. Well, for us, even when we acknowledge that there's parts of this COVID narrative that are faulty, we still have to deal with the reality of putting ourselves at risk of getting sick on a daily basis when the proletariat has to go work, support their families on a daily basis. And that will just be a reality at the end of the day that the liberal blue check types like Bari Weiss will remain forever disconnected from.